Hi, I'm Pfc Klahn. My real name is Kenneth C. Klahn, and my father was Kenneth K. Klahn. Was in World War II in the 10th Mountain Division, and the purpose of this video is to tell his story in a tragic duck accident. A duck is an amphibious army truck. He was in heavy combat in North Italy in World War II. There is new interest now in this tragic accident of 25 U.S. Army soldiers drowning when a duck sank on Lake Garda, and my dad was there, told me the story. So he told me the story in the late 1960s or early 1970s. That was 20 to 25 years after the war. Well, it's been 50 years now since Vietnam. So it was a fresh story in Dad's mind. And I asked him a lot of questions, and I listened very, very intently. And I got all of his war stories. I'll tell some more of his war stories in a different video. This one is focused on this duck accident. And so I would like to tell you secondhand his story, and I want to keep it to the facts as he told me. I'll give you the context of what happens, and of course the story is very short. The 10th Mountain Division was pursuing the German army out of the North Apennine Mountains, across the Po River Valley, and now into the Alps themselves. Lake Garda is the foothill of the Alps. The southern end of this very large Italian lake touches the Po Valley, and then immediately you get these uplifts into the Alps. The Germans were trying to get over the Brenner Pass back through Austria into Germany itself, or there was a fear that they would form the National Redoubt, which would have been a mountain holdout. So rather than having the Germans surrender, they would have had this very tough defensive position in the Alps. So the 10th Mountain Division was the spearhead of the Allied forces in Italy, and they were holding the Germans by the belt and trying to stay as close as they could. Now the Lake Garda is, as I said, is a mountain lake, and it has one road up the east side that traverses the lake from south to north, and that road goes through the rocks, and there are, I believe it was 5 tunnels, or I should say 5 tunnels were blown by German engineers so that the 10th Mountain Division could not go on the road. They had to go around these tunnels, so they got amphibious trucks, which are called ducks, DUKW. And so that's the way they went up the lake, heavy combat. Now the Germans were also on the other side of the lake, overwatching the 10th Mountain Division and directing 88 millimeter artillery fire on the Americans. So it was, as I said, heavy combat, lots of casualties, and the objective was maintain the initiative, don't give the Germans a rest, don't let the Germans get away up into Austria and Germany or into the Alps. So there was that sense of urgency. Now, as they got to the north end of the lake, the town is called Torboli, on the northeast corner of the lake. Also is difficult to pass over an anvil-shaped mountain to the northwest corner of the lake, where the Germans were going to proceed up into the Brenner Pass. So at any rate, it's a small north end of this very large lake. Torboli is a small town on the beach, and Dad was there. Now they were going to cross at night. The reason is they were having artillery duels between his artillery unit and the German artillery. They had to cross at night to avoid German artillery fire, which was direct fire. And and they had to cross the lake on the north end in order to avoid other road blockages. So, where they were headed was a town called Riva del Garde. I've been to these places myself. I went in 2006 and laid a wreath on the water in honor of these 25 dead. So, so as Dad told me the story, the tunnels were blown. They had to use ducks. They were going to get in the water and make this crossing at night and hold the back belt of the Germans and get as close as they could to defeat them.
How many ducks were there?
Now, I have never read, thank you for that question, I never read or have seen the total number of ducks. My story involves the 2 ducks immediately involved with Dad. Now, Dad was a private first class, and so your picture of the war is rather personal and rather close. And he wasn't in charge of that. He was in charge of his heavy 50 caliber machine gun section. So the duck he was on initially was the ill-fated duck, and a lieutenant, a transportation lieutenant, not from the 10th Mountain Division, came up and said, "You and you," pointing to another soldier, and to my dad, "get out of this duck and get into the other duck," because the duck was overloaded. It had an artillery piece on it. Initially, I thought it was a 105 caliber, because that's Dad's C battery was 105 howitzers. However, most of the fellows on the ill-fated duck were B battery, which is 75 millimeter pack or mountain artillery. So it was a 75 millimeter artillery piece. So, and 25 men, 25, 26, 27 men, actually. So overloaded. There was grumbling. People were concerned. Lieutenant comes up and says, "You and you get out of this one, get in the other duck." So Dad made the crossing at night. It's inky black. Got to Riva del Garda. It's a very short crossing because I've been on that water. He described it as a short crossing, and it is. Although I don't know the distance. Could be 4 kilometers, something like that. And he found out that the other duck had capsized, or swamped, if you will. Just got low in the water and went in. And everyone died except for one man who I understand his name is Corporal Ho, H-O-U-G-H. Apparently he was a lifeguard and in civilian life. Clung to a box of rations, C or K rations, and was able to get out. Now, this was cold mountain water. Dad described it as a bottomless lake. It's nighttime. You're not going to swim. You got wool clothing, web belt, ammunition, helmet, rifle, and then the gear on the boat. So that's the reason the men drowned. So a huge tragedy, and one of those close shaves Dad described, out of many close shaves that he experienced, a dud artillery shell landed in his foxhole, direct fire as he crossed the Po River, attacked by a German airplane. So many of those events that he called a close shave. So this was certainly one of those close shaves. So I've told you a lot of things that I don't read in other descriptions. The reason they crossed at night was to hang on to the Germans, to maintain the initiative, also that to avoid direct fire from the German artillery. As I said, Dad was in artillery duels between his artillery unit and the German artillery. By the way, he noted that the famous Colonel Darby was killed the same day in the same place by an artillery shell in the city. So very, very heavy combat and a tight situation. So what haven't I told?
What happened when they got to the other side?
Well, confusion. I mean, Dad was informed that the other duck did not make it. And his feeling was, oh, that was the duck I was on. So that's why you call it a close shave. it was a tragic accident avoided by just sheer luck. This lieutenant of men, he didn't know what else.
How long did or was there any rescue effort?
No, there's no. As a matter of fact, this duck has recently been found by a remote submarine with the help of Italian civilians, and I think some American activity. The U.S. military looks for its missing in action, and recently, in the last few years, they found the duck. Now, it was hard to find because they didn't know at what point it had gone down. So at any rate, you can go on YouTube, you can see a video overlooking this duck on the quote-unquote bottomless lake, and you don't see any men, you see very little equipment. Now, I've been on an Army duck, and they're bigger than they look in a photograph, but they, as I said, they look like a boat. What else?
Were there any other similar disasters to this one with these ducks?
Not at that particular place. Now, there was, I think there was this is what I read. I didn't hear this directly from Dad, but there was an explosion of an artillery shell in the mouth of one of the tunnels, and multiple infantry guys getting killed. The 10th Mountain Division had an extremely high casualty rate because they fought so hard. Now, the World War II is of drownings and accidents. The most noteworthy was a training training for D-Day and a friendly fire, just nutty accident where 2 boatloads, I guess, of soldiers died just in training in England. So it's not unusual to have an accident like that, but for the 10th Mountain Division, it just seemed like something that should not have happened, and yet did. Now, I don't know who to blame, and I don't particularly care. They tried to even out the load. The one Dad was on made it. The one he got off didn't make it.
So you're saying they were overloaded, and that's why they sank. Why didn't they have more of these? Do you have any idea?
Well, I don't know how many ducks were involved. There could have been 4 or 5 in this movement.
Okay.
But I just know the story of, because I'm not going to fill it in with hearsay. Dad was on this duck, get on that duck. So I'm only concerned with the 2 ducks. In combat, you make do with what you've got, and the idea is the accomplishment of the mission, and it hazards the people.
How did the sinking kind of affect the play out of the battle? How did they recover and go on?
Well, I don't believe the Germans knew anything had happened. All the Germans knew is the 10th Mountain Division is close on our tail. And it was a matter of days. Now, this was, I believe, April 30th. Now, Dad was in a convent, being quartered in a convent between Riva del Garda and the Brenner Pass, when he got news that the war had ended. And the feeling, I understand the feeling was relief. So they were taking casualties right up to the end. What else?
So he felt relieved. Did he ever tell you how maybe some of the other people felt about the accident? How did the other guy feel?
I heard some of the infantry guys talking in, these are men in their 80s and 90s, when I went in 2006. One guy said, well, what were they even doing that for? As if it was as if it were spontaneous, or they weren't supposed to do it. So there's a lot of confusion that surrounds the event. And so, it's my job to just tell you just the straight story of what Dad told. Now, some of the things that I have put together since, there were C battery, which is the same as an infantry company. It's a battery of artillery. And B battery guys. Most of the guys that died on that duck were B battery. And there were a handful of C battery guys. And Dad from Sea Battery, got out, got in the other boat. Sorry, I don't know the name of the other soldier involved, who also narrowly missed that drowning. Um, what was your question again?
How did
the others
he
feel?
about that?
By the way, another thing I note, one of the guys that died was a former first sergeant who'd been busted, which happens. That kind of thing happens in war. And now he's a private on this, but he was a first sergeant, and I guess it would have been B Battery. The artillery didn't take as many casualties as the infantry, but they took their fair share, especially of artillery casualties, which is very fearsome. So it was just, it's interesting to me that the 10th Mountain Division held on to their momentum and their aggressive combat spirit all the way through the war, all the way up through the end. And the Germans were giving it to them as hard as they could. This was not defeated old men and young and youth. This was elite German troops who were relatively fresh, if you will, because mountain warfare is such that the defender is protected. So that's why it was such a hard fight. And the terrain and the situation. But what made it rough, but the 10th Mountain Division was very aggressive in the war and better trained. And so very physically fit. So Dad just, all I could say is Dad said he felt lucky. He always had something nice to say about the other guy. And about himself, he said, I was lucky to be in a good unit, because when you're in a good unit, your chances of getting out alive are better. What else?
Now we know they were pursuing the Germans, but what was the specific necessity of crossing there at night at that time?
Yeah, it was because to avoid direct fire from German artillery, and the whole war in Italy is questioned. Why did we even fight in Italy at all? And the reason is maintain the initiative. So if you just quit the war for a few months or for a year and wait for the D-Day attack and don't advance in Italy, you give the Germans a chance to regroup. What else do? You're bringing a decision. That's what initiative and momentum does. It brings about a decision. So they had to fight the Germans as tenaciously as possible. And as aggressively as possible. And that's what the 10th Division did in Italy. They were more aggressive. They were better equipped, better trained, and fitter troops. As I say, an elite unit like a Ranger unit, like a parachute unit, like a Marine unit. This was a mountain unit, mountain climbers. So they were more aggressive. They were in the lead, in the vanguard. And by the way, they weren't supposed to be in the lead in the last offensive, but they took the lead anyway. So they were very, very aggressive. You're not going to give the Germans a night to regroup. So by the time you cross that lake, let's say you give them an extra day or 2 days before you cross the lake. Oh, let's wait for the engineers to open the roads. The Germans are going to regroup and have a better defense. So if you keep the momentum, the Germans cannot regroup.
Yeah. I think that's it for...
Okay, that's the story. Let me just make sure that I haven't left out something Dad said. Oh, something I found out later was that probably the reason he was told to get out of the one duck and in the other duck. And this duck was full of ammunition, a 75 millimeter artillery piece, which is a 5-component, big, heavy piece of equipment. 27 men initially. That's a lot of gear and equipment and weight. And Dad was a 50 caliber machine gunner. So that's very heavy crew served weapon. So it was the logical choice to get the machine gun and the machine gunner and probably his assistant machine gunner or one of his loaders, because it's a crew, that's the reason. So that being a 50 caliber machine gunner, while it did get him in some trouble in combat, saved his life that day. And that's something I surmised by piecing together other stories. But I hope what I've done in this interview today is given you Dad's straight story, and hopefully you've learned a few facts that some other stories didn't know. And thank you for asking me to do this interview, and you can always write me for more questions.